Welcome to another episode of Under the Agency Hood, an interview series designed to shine a light on how agencies think and how they deliver value to their clients. My name is Mark Sneider. I'm founder, CEO of RSW US. We're the nation's leading outsourced business development firm. Work almost exclusively with marketing service agencies of all types and sizes, and started the business back in 2005. Today, we're here with Craig Johnson, the founder and president of Matchstic. Matchstic is a transformational brand identity agency built for bold leaders looking to take their brands to a radically different and more meaningfully relevant place. They're deep into helping their clients with brand transformations, brand refreshes, employer branding, brand creation. Matchstick opened its doors a couple of years before we started in 2003 and has helped all sizes and types of brands, all leading towards radically relevant brand transformation. So, Craig, welcome to our podcast today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
All right. So before we dive deep into the topics, can you tell me a little bit about Matchstick, who you are, what you do, what your superpower is, and how that translates into value for your clients?
Yeah, sure. Well, like you said, we're a branding firm, so really helping clients, when they're in these moments of saying, how do we define our position in the market and/or how do we express our identity in the market, and a lot of companies that are at inflection points, right, where their brand doesn't accurately represent who they are, and it's time to take a little bit of a fresh look. Like you said, sometimes it's a transformative, change that we make, and sometimes it's a little bit more of refreshing things and kind of bringing it up to modern times. But people kind of asking those questions, and it's everything from brand strategy to naming to visual identity to verbal identity to brand implementation and launch.
Got it. So what do you think triggers a marketer to want to kind of work their way through a brand transformation, and how can you help them sort of determine whether now is the right time for something like that or not?
Yeah, so typically it's there's some sort of, it's usually triggered by, oftentimes it's some sort of merger acquisition situation. So
Okay.
that's an obvious time where identity is being questioned, right? These two
Okay.
companies merging together. Are we going to stay two brands? Are we going to become one of these two brands? Are we going to become a new brand, merged together with a completely new name? So that's a common situation. Another common situation is the company has kind of leveled up to, and they're growing, but their brand hasn't, right? And maybe they're competing at a higher level, or their brand maybe is just a little dated, stuck in a decade or sometimes a couple decades that are old, and it just feels old and doesn't feel like it fits who they actually are. So it's time to take another look at that and kind of come up with something that can, that they can go to market with, that provides the clarity that their customers are needing, but also just give the overall impression that feels like it matches who they are.
Okay, that's cool. So I noticed that you do talk a fair amount about this notion of radical relevance. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, how it's different from maybe other branding firms that are out there, how it helps your clients maybe look at things a little bit differently?
Yeah, so it's really kind of this idea. Radically relevant is saying, hey, your brand kind of needs to do two things primarily. It needs to be, it needs to radically differentiate from your competitors, but it also needs to be incredibly relevant to your customers. And I would say a lot of people understand that the idea of relevance, right? Value propositions and how do we connect into their need. Typically, it's our job to say, yes, but you also need to be different. You need to radically stand out in your space. And most people are comfortable, feeling and looking similar to your competitors, but that doesn't help your buyers, understand difference. They're not looking for the same. They're looking for, how are you different? And of course, the way you deliver, your products or services might be different, but the brand is another way to signal that. We take that idea and then we kind of go a level deeper and get a lot more, strategic about, well, what does it mean to be radically relevant? And we have these 6 different brand impact factors that we can kind of measure and kind of judge against.
Yeah, yeah. I was actually going to ask you that. I noticed on your site you've got what you're calling sort of this radically relevant assessment that any interested marketer can take to learn a little bit more about their brand. Talks about the Super Six. I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about that. Tell me and those watching today how it works and what value they might get out of filling out the assessment.
Yeah. So some of this is trying to a little bit decode, well, what does it mean to have a good brand? So first we say, this idea of being radically relevant. And then you say, okay, cool. Well, how do I become radically relevant? And we say, okay, well, let's go a level deeper. And we have these 6 different brand impact factors that, like you said, we call the Super Six. There's 3 under the radical side and there's 3 under the relevant side. So on the radical side, there's brand clarity. People clearly understand what you do. What happens a lot of times is as companies grow and evolve and shift or add new products or services, the story gets just so much longer and everybody's telling a different version. So we got to come back to like, what's the clarity of who we are? So that's one. Number 2 is distinction. Are we expressing ourselves in a way that where we really stand out from our direct competitors? So there's a lot of different ways to do that. And then the third is control. Do we have solid controls, which ultimately leads to the brand consistency? When people are experiencing, different marketing and communications and, just product experiences, do we have good controls over all of that so that, ultimately our customers have a consistent experience? So those 3 on the radical side. Then on the relevant to our customer side, are we attracting the right type of audiences? Do we know who our audience is? Do we understand the way their needs and mindsets? And are we speaking to them in a way that connects? And then there's the second is devotion, the second under relevant is devotion, which is, are we delivering on those promises over time and building that loyalty and emotional connection? And then lastly is alignment. Do we have the internal alignment and everybody understands, our sales team, our product team, our marketing team, our, the leadership, are we singing from the same songbook, so to speak?
So that's an internal component.
That's an internal component. And that's where employer brand oftentimes comes into play. And so every project, it's rare that all 6 of those are a problem. Right. So when we come in, and that's what the assessment does, you can go on our website and do the self-assessment to say, all right, well, how are we, what do you think are your issues? And a lot of times what the assessment does, if you have multiple people on your team take it, people have different opinions about what the problem is. So, right. Yeah. Which is just kind of a reflection of perhaps an alignment issue. But so most projects, it's like maybe 2 or 3 of those are a problem. People will say, like, for instance, our clarity is really strong, distinction's not good, control is really bad, but devotion is great and alignment is really bad. Okay, great. Now that allows us to kind of know, what do we need to focus on? What do we need to fix?
Right. Gives you the framework off of which to work.
Because if a good brand is a good brand, not all brand challenges are the same. Sometimes people say, we have all the customers in the world that we can get, but we're having a hard time, recruiting team members, right? Or, we're about to, we have a good business, but we're about to launch our product in a very different way. So we need to communicate that. So a lot of times the rebrand is a chance to say, let's have an external reflection of the internal change. I like to kind of tell the story of looking at country flags over history, right? And these are it's just like a brand identity. It's some colors and shapes that represent a country. And when do countries change their flags, right? And sometimes you have a big change, right? Where the flag looks nothing like it did before. And sometimes you have a really simple evolutionary change, like United States buys, Alaska and Hawaii, they got to fit two more stars in there, right? It's just something that
Right.
is good to
Yeah.
change, but to better reflect, but it doesn't need to be a complete overhaul. So
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. Makes good sense. So, website is Matchstick without the K, right?
correct,
Dot
correct.
com. So yeah, definitely would recommend to those watching taking that assessment. Could really be enlightening for you. So I'm just curious if you maybe talk to me about a client or two that you're particularly proud of that maybe applied some of the Super Six or radical relevant sort of perspective to the challenges that they were facing.
Yeah, so one I can think of was like a chemical manufacturing company that really sold
Okay.
kind of almost like raw materials, right? But they were wanting to create more of their own products to go to market with. They literally sell
Okay.
chemicals that are like in everybody's home, but you wouldn't know it, right? Because they sell to other people who make the things that go in your home.
Right.
And they said we're going to make some of our own things. They had never ever focused on brand before. I mean, this is $1 billion company, right, that nobody's ever heard of.
Sure.
And so they had to build a story around the brand, and then also
Okay.
talking about attraction. They were going to go to market, potentially go public. So they also have to build a brand for the investment community now, which they had
Yeah.
never had to worry about before.
Okay.
Which is just
Okay.
another example of like there's different angles of why these things matter. But we built a whole story around that. They were able to go back to market. They started launching products. One of their first products sold like $10 million in the first year just with that one single product. And all of a sudden, when you're going to market with a product, your margins are a lot higher. So there's just a lot of things that they could, easily kind of draw a line from, the
Hmm.
brand work to seeing the impact of it. And just
Right.
seeing,
Right.
and then they're acquiring new companies, and we're putting together a plan for like, how do you think about rolling that brand in? So that's an example. Another example would be one in the education space
Okay.
that was two different leading companies coming together.
Okay.
One was doing school accreditation. The other one was doing student assessments. So we said, in a way, it's
Okay.
measuring schools, measuring students, right?
Yep.
And
Okay.
they
Interesting.
said, for internal cultural reasons, they didn't want it to feel like one is going to work for the others. They really wanted a brand new name. So we did a whole brand research project and brand positioning, and then we came up with a new name, which was Cognia, which kind of was rooted in the Latin for cognition and learning. We got a great domain for it, and then they were able to kind of relaunch now with this new story, and kind of the heart and the mission behind it is, we're able to really impact the entire educational system because the logo is almost like a dial. Like we can zoom out and look at the entire
Hmm.
education system, and they were all over the world.
Nice.
Or we can zoom all the way in and look at an individual student. And so it gave them kind of this new language behind that was the heart behind it too, not
Very
just
cool.
what they do, but why did they
Yeah.
do it?
Okay. Very cool. Yeah. So it sounds like you guys go beyond just like doing design work.
Yes,
You're
we have a whole
providing. Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
we've got a whole brand strategy team. They are like the consultants of the group. I say they're like management consultants, but only through the filter of brand.
Right.
And
Okay.
then we've
Got it.
got writers, and then we've got designers, and then we've got
Yeah.
namers, and we have
Right.
project managers.
Okay, yeah, because you talked a little bit about positioning, and so is the output for that manufacturing firm or that B2B firm you were talking about, is the output both design and sort of positioning statements
Oh
to
yeah,
help
yeah.
them?
So there's kind
Okay,
of internal positioning statements, but then
yeah,
that has to then
right,
translate to external expression of how are we going to, what's our tagline, what's our
yeah,
intro paragraph, what's our elevator sentence, all of those
okay.
things.
Do you
Um,
ever have clients come to you or marketers come to you looking for just design or just strategy and
certainly,
positioning?
Certainly.
Okay.
Sometimes
Okay.
people come to us. It could be a former client coming back or a new client, and maybe they're going to just launch a new product.
Okay.
So
Got
that's
it.
a little simpler, right? But that new product, maybe it needs to kind of like ladder up into kind of from the story of it needs to ladder up into the parent brand, but it needs a
Right.
name. It needs, and then there's questions of what does it need a new logo? Does it not? Does it look like the big company? Does it not? And
Yeah.
it's funny. I say a lot of times that people bring us in because they've launched a lot of new initiatives and products over the years. And what happens is, you do one of those and it doesn't feel like a really big deal to give it a name and its own little
Hmm.
logo. You
Hmm.
do that 20 times. Now you've got 20 different names, 20 different logos,
Yeah.
and none of it makes sense. And
Yeah.
then our brand strategy team will come in and work on, brand architecture, which is let's organize these systems of,
Yeah. Makes sense.
products and naming. And does it all make sense to the customer at the end of the day? Because if you're looking, whoever was the product leader for that one thing is not thinking necessarily about the rest of the business. That's not their job. They're trying to just take this one product to market. But we're always saying, hold on, time out. Let's think about how this fits into the overall story of this brand. And maybe the answer is you need to completely separate it, right? For
Yeah.
different reasons, but let's make that decision wisely.
Yeah. Yeah. I would imagine you probably have some prospects or marketers coming to you thinking they need X when in reality they need X plus Y plus
Right.
Z,
Yeah. There's one right
so,
now where it's a company that made an acquisition that gave them a larger geographic footprint. And
okay.
they said, can we change the names, of those locations to our normal parent name, or will we
Okay.
lose customers and they need to stay the same and just
Mhm.
be a wholly owned subsidiary of us?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
think about
Interesting.
this. Let's come in and do that market research and that customer, insight and understanding to make an educated, recommendation around that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that happens with some measure of frequency. I can think of like, banks buying up other banks in other cities and having to
We've
deal
done
with
it
all
in
those same
banks.
kinds of.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seen all those kinds of issues. Yeah, I did notice on your site that you guys work with a wide range of companies across a wide range of industries. Is that fairly accurate?
It's fairly accurate. We have some clusters, for,
Okay.
a lot of B2B, B2B tech, but we've done some stuff
Okay.
in entertainment and media. Like we've rebranded a lot of TV stations,
Okay.
things like that. But I would say it's mostly mid-market companies. So these are not
Yeah.
small businesses, but they're
Okay.
usually not the Coca-Colas of the world. It's companies
Got
in
it.
that, call it 50 million to a billion,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
average.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Because those really big ones are probably going to the big network branding agencies or something like that, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a lot of times
Willing to
working
pay.
with global firms and they're paying $1
Yeah.
million plus,
I was going to say
for those
paying
initiatives.
ridiculous sums of money. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, cool. So, AI is all the rage. I'm just curious how AI has impacted your agency, either positively or negatively. How are you using it? I assume you're using it on some level these days. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it hasn't a lot, but I'll tell you like how it has. Number one, depending on the client, we want to make sure we're being transparent about how we're using
Yeah,
it. Some clients say, I don't
sure.
want you putting any of my information in there. It can help in doing some research, when you're trying
Okay.
to kind of dig into a market and understand what's going on. And what we're trying to do is, a lot of people take the work that we do and they will bring it in house to do your day-to-day marketing and sales support, right? And there
Yeah.
may be ways that, like, if you're trying to write copy with AI, how do we take the brand voice and guidelines and how do we help you write a good prompt for doing that? You know what I
There
mean?
you go. Yeah. Right.
But and we've done some using it to maybe almost do our own custom stock imagery, which
Okay.
again, you got to be really careful about the client knowing what you're doing. And some
Sure.
clients are like, you're not putting our logo into that system right there, because there's the IP part of a lot of that is really
Yeah.
kind of up in the air right now, who owns what.
Yeah.
um so we got to be careful with it, but it's slowly coming, and mostly what we're thinking about is how can you use AI to implement a lot of the brands on the day to day
Sure.
that we're helping create for our clients. But
Sure.
we're not
Yeah. Yeah.
creating any custom brand work with AI. I want to be
Yeah.
clear about,
Yeah.
because I think that
Yeah.
what happens with AI is it kind of, if you talk about being radically relevant, it tends to create things that look the same as everything else, and that's
I was
not what
gonna.
we want to do.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would imagine that the deliverables are fairly finite, in terms of what it can produce for you, and
Right.
definitely doesn't, it's going to be hard for it to replace a thinking and strategy that sits behind designs, and so yeah, it'll be really interesting, ultimately to see where it plays. So, one last question for you: if a marketer were looking for a new branding agency, what would you tell them the reasons why they should consider Matchstick? Beyond maybe what we've already discussed here.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say, branding is one of those funny services that in the marketing agency world, almost everyone will say that they do. But we are
Sure.
unique. We are unique in that that's literally all we do, day in and day out. We do brand work. So if you want to work with somebody who has done hundreds and hundreds of these, like, we understand the process, we understand all the potential roadblocks and speed bumps, and how do we talk to our board about this? How do we integrate this? How do we introduce this to our team and to our customers? And should we do a slow integrated rollout, or should we kind of flip the switch overnight? All of those things we can help people think about. And again, our job is not just to create new, fun, cool things. It's how do we
Yeah.
help you go to market with the right brand, which a lot of times means we should change less than you maybe want to. I mean, we
Yeah.
have talked
Right.
more companies out of changing their name, because
Hmm.
people come to us saying we're not sure. And naming, just as an example, is one of those things that, like, it's like, if it's not very broken, a lot of times changing it creates more problems than
Yeah.
it does, staying the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, I would imagine that, I know as a business owner, you sometimes get bored with your own website and feel like it needs to be changed when the reality is, most people look at it once or twice and aren't terribly bored with it.
Yeah,
So I would imagine the same principle probably plays on the branding side as well. So
yeah,
giving people sort of providing the insights and having that kind of an experience, is probably really useful. So,
yeah. The other thing I would
well,
add
cool.
is that
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
industry, the average tenure of employees in our industry is about 2.5 years. And as a
Really?
company, we double that. So our average employee has been here for 5 years, which I
That's
think
great.
just says a lot about the stability of the team who's going to be
Of the
working with
organization.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. Well, good. Well, listen, I really appreciate you making the time today. I think it's, you guys, I love the whole concept of radical relevance and the, the six sort of variables that sit underneath it. And hopefully, some of the folks watching today will jump on your site and take the assessment and be enlightened by the things that it provides them and the ideas that you're able to share with them. So, you guys are doing some great work and certainly wish you all the best going forward.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me, Mark. This is fun.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it was great. Thanks a lot, Craig.